After the divorce, my ex-husband married a secretary and bought her a dream house with my seized money. They flaunted their lavish life on social media, but they didn't know I'd secretly recorded all his talks about hiding income. When the tax officers knocked on their door, "I'm glad you're here with me. Please listen to my story till the end and let me know which city you're listening from. That way I can see how far my story has traveled." 23 years. That's how long I believed in the life Mark and I had built together in our quiet suburb outside Chicago. I was Deborah Harris, 58 years old, and I thought I knew exactly who I was: a devoted wife, a mother of 2 grown children, and a partner in what seemed like a solid, respectable marriage. Mark was a financial consultant with his own firm downtown. For over 2 decades, I watched him leave every morning in his pressed suits, briefcase in hand, kissing me goodbye with what I believed was genuine affection. I managed our home, raised our kids, Sarah and Michael, and volunteered at the local library. Our life wasn't glamorous, but it was comfortable, predictable, safe. Or so I thought. The first crack appeared on a Tuesday evening in March, 3 years ago. Mark came home later than usual, and there was something different about him. Not just tired, distant. When I asked about his day, he barely looked up from his phone. "Just work stuff, Deb," he muttered. "You wouldn't understand." That phrase became his favorite shield. "You wouldn't understand." As if 23 years of marriage hadn't taught me anything about his world. The signs multiplied like weeds I hadn't noticed until they'd taken over the garden. Late nights at the office, weekend conferences that never quite added up, a new cologne I hadn't bought him. And then there was Ashley, his secretary, 24 years younger than him, with perfect makeup and a practiced smile I'd seen at exactly 3 office holiday parties. When I finally confronted him in June, he didn't even try to lie convincingly. "I'm not happy anymore, Deborah," he said, as if that simple statement justified everything. "I haven't been for years. Ashley understands me in ways you never have." The divorce proceedings started that summer. Mark hired Thomas Brennan, a shark of an attorney known for protecting wealthy husbands' assets. I hired Linda Chen, a competent lawyer my friend recommended, but I couldn't afford anyone in Brennan's league. We'd always kept joint accounts. I'd trusted Mark completely with our finances. Why wouldn't I? He was the financial expert. During discovery, Mark's documentation painted a picture of a man who'd made comfortable money, but nothing extraordinary. His firm's value was assessed at a fraction of what I'd imagined. Our joint savings seemed smaller than I remembered. "The market's been tough," he explained during mediation, shaking his head with practiced concern. "The firm took some hits. I'm barely keeping things afloat." I believed him. God help me, I still believed him. The settlement left me with half of what appeared to be there: our smaller car, some retirement funds, and a lump sum that seemed reasonable until I realized it wouldn't cover first month's rent and deposit on a decent apartment. Mark kept the house, our house where I'd raised our children, because he argued he needed the home office for his business. The judge agreed. By October, I was living in a 2-bedroom apartment in a less desirable neighborhood, working part-time at the library for actual pay now, stretching every dollar. Sarah and Michael were sympathetic but busy with their own lives in other cities. They couldn't understand the full scope of what I'd lost. How could they? I barely understood it myself. Then came the Instagram post that changed everything. It was a cold evening in January, 8 months after the divorce was finalized. I was scrolling mindlessly through social media, trying to distract myself from the sound of my elderly neighbor's television bleeding through the thin walls. That's when I saw it. A photo posted by Ashley's account, which I'd never blocked because some masochistic part of me couldn't look away. The image showed a sprawling contemporary house with floor-to-ceiling windows, situated on what looked like at least 2 acres of pristine, landscaped property. The caption read, "Finally home. Dreams do come true when you're with the right person. Blessed in ya new beginnings. Dream home." My hands started shaking. I recognized that style of house. It was exactly what I'd shown Mark from a magazine 7 years ago, pointing out the features I loved. "Someday," I'd said, dreaming out loud. He'd laughed and said we couldn't afford it, not even close. I clicked through to her profile. More photos. A luxury car in the driveway, a Mercedes, gleaming white. Ashley posing in designer clothes I could never afford, even in our comfortable years. Mark in the background of several shots looking tanned and relaxed, grinning in a way I hadn't seen in years. Vacation photos from Cabo, Paris, the Maldives. The dates on the earliest posts went back 6 months. Just 2 months after our divorce was finalized, they'd gotten married in a small ceremony. Just 4 months after that, they'd bought this house. I sat there in my cramped apartment staring at the screen and felt something cold and hard crystallize in my chest. This wasn't possible. Not unless everything Mark had told the court was a lie. How much had he really hidden? How long had he been planning this? And what was I going to do about it? I didn't sleep that night. I sat at my small kitchen table until dawn, scrolling through every photo, every post, every comment on Ashley's social media. Mark's, too, though his accounts were more private. Each image felt like a knife twisting deeper. There was the chef's kitchen with marble countertops, the kind I'd circled in home magazines. The master bathroom with a soaking tub overlooking their private garden. Ashley in their walk-in closet showing off rows of shoes and handbags. Mark at what appeared to be a country club, holding a golf club, laughing with men in expensive polo shirts. I grabbed a notebook and started writing down everything I could observe. The house alone had to be worth at least $1 million, maybe more depending on the location. The car was a new model, probably $70,000. The vacations, I looked up those resorts, weren't cheap. We were talking $5,000 to $10,000 per trip, and they'd taken at least 3 and 6 months. My hands were steadier now. The initial shock was giving way to something else, something sharper. I thought back to the divorce proceedings. Mark's attorney had presented financial statements showing his firm's declining revenue. There were documents about business debts, overhead costs, partnership disputes. The firm's valuation had come in at just $300,000, and even that was tied up in assets that couldn't be easily liquidated, or so they claimed. I'd accepted it because I didn't know any better, because Mark had always handled our finances while I managed everything else, because some part of me still trusted the man I'd spent 23 years with, even as he was leaving me. What a fool I'd been. By the time the sun came up, I'd made a list of questions. Where did the money for that house come from? How could his business be struggling while he was living like this? Had he hidden accounts, property, investments? What else had he lied about during the divorce? The rage I felt was cold, not hot. I wasn't screaming or crying. I was thinking, calculating. For the first time in months, I felt something other than defeat and confusion. I felt purpose. At 9 a.m., I called in sick to work. Then I went to my computer and started researching. Divorces involving hidden assets. How to prove financial fraud in divorce court. Statute of limitations for modifying divorce settlements. I read for hours, taking notes, following links, diving deeper into the legal rabbit hole. What I learned both energized and terrified me. In Illinois, if you could prove your spouse had fraudulently concealed assets during divorce proceedings, you could petition the court to reopen the case. The standard of proof was high. You needed solid evidence, not just suspicion, but it was possible. It could be done. I also learned that I'd need money for this fight. Good attorneys weren't cheap, and the ones who specialized in forensic accounting and asset discovery charged premium rates. I looked at my bank balance and felt my stomach drop. I had maybe $20,000 left from the settlement, most of which I needed for living expenses. But I also had something else. I had the truth on my side, and I had motivation that Mark couldn't possibly understand. This wasn't just about money anymore. This was about justice, about proving I hadn't been crazy or paranoid, about making sure he didn't get away with stealing my life and then flaunting his theft on social media. I thought about my children. Sarah was 31, a teacher in Denver. Michael was 28, working in tech in Austin. They'd both been confused by how little I'd received in the divorce, but they'd accepted their father's explanations about business troubles. They still talked to him regularly, still saw him as the successful, reliable dad they'd grown up with. They had no idea what he'd done. Should I tell them? Not yet. Not until I had proof. I couldn't bear the thought of them doubting me, or worse, trying to talk me out of pursuing this because they thought I was being bitter or vindictive. I made a decision that morning. I would find a way to afford a good lawyer. I would gather evidence. I would document everything, and I would take Mark back to court. But first, I needed to be smart about this. I couldn't let him know I suspected anything. I needed time to build my case, to line up my ducks in a row. If Mark caught wind that I was investigating, he might move assets again, hide them better, make them impossible to trace. I went to the bathroom and looked at myself in the mirror. I looked tired, older than my 58 years. But there was something new in my eyes, a hardness that hadn't been there before. "You can do this," I told my reflection. "You have to." I picked up my phone and started searching for attorneys who specialized in complex divorce litigation and forensic accounting. My hands didn't shake anymore. I was done being a victim. The fight was just beginning. Linda Chen, my original divorce attorney, listened carefully as I explained what I'd discovered. Her office was modest but professional, in a strip mall between a dry cleaner and a tax preparation service. She'd done her best during my divorce, but we both knew she'd been outmatched by Mark's attorney. "Deborah, I'll be honest with you," she said, leaning back in her chair. "What you're describing, if it's true, is serious fraud. But proving it will require resources I don't have. You need someone who specializes in forensic financial investigation. I can recommend someone, but he's expensive." "How expensive?" I asked, though my stomach was already sinking. "Robert Matsuda. He's one of the best in Chicago. Initial retainer is typically $25,000, and that's just to start the investigation." More than my entire remaining settlement. I felt the weight of impossibility settling on my shoulders. How could I fight someone who had all the money when he'd stolen that money from me in the first place? Linda must have seen my face fall. "There's another option," she said. "Some attorneys take cases like this on contingency if the evidence is strong enough. They get a percentage of whatever you recover. Matsuda doesn't typically work that way, but let me make a call. The photos you showed me, that's compelling preliminary evidence." 3 days later, I sat in Robert Matsuda's downtown office, 42 floors up with a view of Lake Michigan. He was in his mid-50s, sharp-eyed and precise in his movements. Everything about him suggested competence and cost. "Mrs. Harris," he said, reviewing the printed Instagram posts I'd brought, "I've looked over what Linda sent me. I'm willing to take your case with a modified arrangement. Reduced retainer $15,000 plus 30% of whatever we recover beyond your original settlement. But I need you to understand. This will be a fight. Your ex-husband clearly planned this, which means he's had help from professionals. We're going to have to dig deep. 15,000. I still didn't have it. But my brother James, who lived in Wisconsin, had always told me to call if I needed help. I'd been too proud during the divorce. I wasn't too proud anymore. James didn't hesitate. "Take it," he said when I called. "We'll call it a loan. Pay me back when you win. By the end of March, Matsuda's team was working. He brought in a forensic accountant named Patricia Wong and a private investigator named David Reeves. They explained their strategy: trace Mark's spending, subpoena bank records, investigate his firm's financial statements, look for hidden accounts, property purchases under corporate names, investment portfolios in trusts, or offshore accounts. The social media posts are helpful, Patricia explained during our first strategy meeting. They establish a lifestyle inconsistent with his claimed income, but we need hard evidence: bank statements, property records, business filings. That's what will stand up in court. I did what I could to help. I searched through old files I'd kept from the marriage, tax returns, bank statements, investment account summaries from years past. I wrote down everything I remembered about Mark's business dealings, names of partners, clients he'd mentioned, properties he'd talked about investing in. Meanwhile, David Reeves started following the paper trail. Within 2 weeks, he'd found the first major discrepancy. The house Mark and Ashley were living in wasn't purchased under Mark's name. It was owned by a Delaware LLC called Ashmark Holdings. Further investigation showed Mark was the sole member of that LLC. Classic asset protection strategy, Matsuda explained. Hold property in corporate entities to shield them from personal liability. Perfectly legal for legitimate purposes. But if he formed this company and bought this property with money he hid during your divorce, that's fraud. The property records showed the house was purchased for $1.2 million, just 3 months after our divorce was finalized. Where had that money come from? That's when I received the first sign that Mark knew something was wrong. It was a text from Sarah. Dad says you've been asking around about his finances. Mom, what's going on? Are you okay? My heart sank. Someone had talked, or Mark had noticed something. Maybe a preliminary subpoena had tipped him off. I called Sarah immediately. Honey, I'm fine, I said carefully. I'm just making sure everything in the divorce was handled correctly. It's routine. Dad sounded worried. He said you might be going through something, maybe having trouble accepting the divorce. He asked if I thought you needed help. There it was. Mark was already trying to control the narrative, painting me as unstable. The thought made my blood boil, but I kept my voice calm. Sarah, I promise you, I'm thinking more clearly than I have in months. Your father doesn't need to worry about me. I'm taking care of myself. After we hung up, I texted Matsuda. He knows something. We need to move faster. His response came quickly. Already on it. Patricia found something big. Can you come to the office tomorrow? I stared at my phone. This was it. The point of no return. Whatever Patricia had found, there was no going back now. Patricia Wong's discovery was even better than I'd hoped. She'd obtained Mark's business bank statements through a court-ordered subpoena, and the numbers told a very different story than what he'd presented during our divorce. Look at this, she said, spreading documents across Matsuda's conference table. 6 months before your divorce filing, there's a transfer of $200,000 from the business operating account to an account at a different bank. Not closed, just moved. Then another $300,000 2 months later. Then regular transfers after that. $50,000 here, $75,000 there. Where did it go? I asked, my heart pounding. A business account for Ashmark Holdings. That's the LLC that owns his house. And look at the timing. Every major transfer happens right before a financial disclosure deadline in your divorce proceedings. He was systematically moving money out of visible accounts into hidden ones. Matsuda leaned forward. This is exactly what we need. It shows intent to deceive, pattern and practice of concealment. The court will not look kindly on this. Over the next 2 weeks, Patricia uncovered more. Investment accounts in the LLC's name holding another $400,000 in stocks and bonds. A business line of credit Mark had never disclosed, with a credit limit of $500,000 and a low balance. meaning he had access to that money but hadn't listed it as an asset. Rent payments from commercial properties owned by shell companies that trace back to Mark's control. The total was staggering. Mark had hidden somewhere between $2 and $3 million in assets that should have been split in our divorce. "We're ready to file," Matsuda said. "Petition to set aside the divorce decree based on fraud. We'll request forensic accounting, full disclosure of all assets, and a complete redistribution. We're also going to ask for attorney's fees and sanctions against Mark for discovery violations." The papers were filed on a Friday morning. By Friday evening, my phone rang, Mark's number. I let it go to voicemail. His voice was tight, controlled, dangerous. "Deborah, what the hell do you think you're doing? You need to call me immediately. This is serious. You have no idea what you're getting into." The next call was from a number I didn't recognize. I answered. "Mrs. Harris, this is Thomas Brennan, Mark Harris's attorney. I think we need to have a conversation about this unfortunate situation before it gets out of hand. These allegations you're making are serious and completely unfounded. You could be opening yourself up to significant legal liability for defamation and harassment." "Mr. Brennan," I said, my voice steadier than I felt, "you can communicate with my attorney, Robert Matsuda. I'm sure you know him." There was a pause. "Matsuda? You hired Matsuda?" The confidence in his voice had cracked just slightly. "Yes, and he has some very interesting documents to show you. I believe you'll be receiving them shortly. Goodbye, Mr. Brennan." I hung up. My hands were shaking, but I felt a rush of satisfaction I hadn't experienced in months. Sunday afternoon, Mark showed up at my apartment. I saw his Mercedes pull into the parking lot from my window. He was alone. No Ashley. I watched him get out, look up at my building with barely concealed contempt, and walk toward the entrance. When he knocked, I opened the door, but left the chain lock engaged. I was not letting him inside. "Deborah, we need to talk." His face was red, a vein pulsing in his temple. This was the real Mark, the one he'd hidden so well during our marriage. Angry, controlling, mean. "We don't need to talk. Our attorneys can talk." "Do you have any idea what you're doing? You're embarrassing yourself, embarrassing Sarah and Michael. These wild accusations." "They're not wild, Mark. We have the bank statements. We have the property records. We have everything." His expression changed, flickered. For just a moment, I saw fear. Then it was gone, replaced by cold calculation. "You're going to withdraw this petition," he said quietly, "because if you don't, I'm going to make your life hell. I have resources you can't imagine. I will drag this out for years. I will bury you in legal fees until you have nothing left. And when it's over, you'll still lose, and you'll be worse off than you are now. Are you threatening me, Mark? Because my attorney will be very interested to hear about this conversation. I'm giving you a reality check." He leaned closer to the gap in the door. "You're not smart enough to win this. You never were. That's why you needed me for 23 years. Without me, you're nothing." Something in me snapped, not into rage, but into absolute clarity. "Get off my property, Mark, now, or I'm calling the police." He stared at me for a long moment, then turned and walked away. I watched him drive off, then closed the door and locked it. My whole body was shaking. I called Matsuda and reported everything Mark had said. He told me it was intimidation, predictable, and to expect more. For the next 3 days, I barely slept. I took 2 personal days from work and stayed in my apartment, jumping at every sound. The confrontation had left me rattled in a way I hadn't anticipated. This was real now. Mark wasn't going to just quietly settle. He was going to fight back, and he was going to be vicious about it. But I'd come too far to stop now. The email came Wednesday morning, not from Mark or his attorney, but from Ashley. The subject line read, "Can we please talk?" Woman to woman? I stared at it for a full minute before opening it. Deborah, I know you must hate me. I understand. I'm not asking you to forgive me or Mark for how things happened, but this legal battle isn't good for anyone. Mark has been so stressed that he's been having chest pains. I'm worried about his health, and I know this must be costing you money you don't have. Can we meet for coffee? Maybe we can find a solution that doesn't require destroying each other in court. Please, I'm reaching out in good faith. Ashley. The manipulation was so transparent, it was almost insulting. But what interested me was the shift in strategy. Threats hadn't worked, so now they were trying sympathy and female solidarity. I forwarded it to Matsuda without responding. His reply was immediate. Don't respond, classic negotiation tactic, they're worried. But Ashley didn't stop. She sent another email the next day, then a text message. Somehow she'd gotten my number. Deborah, please. I know I'm the last person you want to hear from, but Mark is willing to talk settlement. Real settlement. Let's not let attorneys drag this out and take all the money. You deserve better than that. 2 days later, a letter arrived at my apartment via courier. Inside was a cashier's check for $50,000 and a handwritten note. Deborah, please accept this as a gesture of good faith. We know the divorce settlement wasn't enough, and we want to make that right. Cash this check, no strings attached. Then let's sit down and talk about a fair resolution, just the three of us, without lawyers taking their cut. You could have a fresh start with this money, real security. All we're asking is that you consider whether a court battle is really what's best for you, for us, and for Sarah and Michael. Think about what they're going through, watching their parents destroy each other. Think about what you really want, revenge or stability. We're trying to do the right thing here. Mark. I held the check in my hands, looking at all those zeros. $50,000. More than double what I had left in my account. Enough to pay off my brother, cover months of rent, stop worrying about every grocery bill. All I had to do was cash it and walk away from the lawsuit. I took a photo of the check and the note, then called Matsuda. Don't cash it, he said immediately. It's an attempt to buy you off and muddy the waters legally. If you cash it, they'll argue you accepted settlement payment and waived your right to further claims. Also, this is potential evidence of their consciousness of guilt. They wouldn't be offering you money if they weren't worried about what we found. I wasn't planning to cash it, I said, but I wanted you to know. Good. This tells me we're winning, Deborah. They're scared. After hanging up, I sat at my kitchen table and stared at that check for a long time. I thought about how easy it would be, how comfortable $50,000 would make my life right now, how I could stop worrying, stop fighting, stop living with this constant knot of anxiety in my stomach. Then I thought about the house Mark and Ashley were living in, the vacations, the designer clothes, the smug look on Mark's face in every photo, the 23 years I'd given him, and how easily he'd discarded me. $50,000 wasn't even close to what he owed me. It was an insult disguised as generosity. I tore the check into small pieces and threw it away. But the incident shook me more than I wanted to admit. I needed support, real support, from people who knew me and cared about me. I'd been so focused on the legal battle that I'd isolated myself from my friends. That weekend, I called my friend Margaret, whom I'd known since our kids were in elementary school together. I told her everything: the hidden assets, the lawsuit, the threats, the attempted bribery. Jesus, Deborah, she said, why didn't you tell me sooner? You've been going through all this alone? I didn't want to burden anyone, and I wasn't sure people would believe me. Believe you? Honey, we all knew something was wrong with that divorce settlement. We just didn't know how to bring it up. Listen, I'm coming over, and I'm bringing Lisa and Joan. We're having a girls' night, and you're going to tell us everything. That night, sitting in my small living room with 3 women I'd known for years, I felt some of the weight lift. They were angry on my behalf. They believed me without question. They offered to help however they could. "What you're doing is brave," Joan said. She was a paralegal and she understood the legal system. Most women would have taken that check and run. They're counting on you being tired and scared. "I am tired and scared," I admitted. "But you're not stopping," Margaret said firmly. "That's what matters. And you're not alone in this. We've got your back." Lisa, who'd gone through her own difficult divorce years ago, squeezed my hand. "He picked the wrong woman to underestimate." For the first time in weeks, I smiled genuinely. They were right. Mark had spent 23 years thinking I was dependent on him, that I couldn't manage without him, that I wasn't smart enough to see through his lies. He was about to learn how wrong he'd been. The knock came on a Saturday morning 2 weeks later. I'd just finished my coffee when I heard it, firm, insistent. Through the peephole, I saw both of them, Mark and Ashley, standing side by side like a united front. My stomach tightened. I hadn't expected them to come back after I'd rejected their offer. I almost didn't answer, but something in me wanted to face them, to show them and myself that I wasn't afraid. I opened the door but stood in the doorway blocking entrance. "What do you want?" Mark's expression was carefully arranged into something approximating contrition. He'd always been good at that, at making his face show whatever emotion would get him what he needed. Ashley stood slightly behind him, her hands clasped in front of her, looking young and nervous. "Another performance." "Deborah, please," Mark said. "Can we come in? We want to talk. Really talk. No lawyers, no games, just closure for everyone's sake." "We can talk right here." "The neighbors," Ashley started, glancing around. "I don't care about the neighbors. Say what you came to say." Mark's jaw tightened slightly. A flash of irritation quickly suppressed. "Fine. Deborah, this has gone too far. This lawsuit is tearing apart our family. Sarah called me crying last night. Did you know that? She's caught in the middle, and it's destroying her." That hit a nerve. He knew it would. Sarah is an adult. She can handle knowing the truth. The truth? Ashley's voice was soft, almost wounded. "Deborah, I understand you're hurt. I understand you feel betrayed. But you're letting your emotions distort reality. Mark has been completely transparent about his finances. What you're accusing him of, it's not just wrong, it's delusional. Delusional." I repeated the words slowly. "That's an interesting choice. We're worried about you," Mark said, and his tone shifted into something I recognized, the patronizing concern he'd used throughout our marriage whenever I questioned him. "This obsession isn't healthy. You're spending money you don't have on lawyers who are feeding you conspiracy theories because they want their cut. Meanwhile, you're living in this..." He gestured at my apartment building with barely disguised contempt. "You're working at a library for minimum wage. You could be moving forward with your life, but instead, you're fixated on destroying mine. I'm not trying to destroy your life. I'm trying to get what's legally mine." "You got what's legally yours." Mark's voice rose, the mask slipping. "The court decided. A judge looked at everything and made a determination. But you can't accept it because you need someone to blame for the fact that our marriage failed. You need me to be the villain." "You're the villain, Mark. You hid millions of dollars." "Alleged millions," Ashley interjected quickly, "that your attorney is claiming exist with no real proof. We have bank statements, property records, transfers you never disclosed." Mark laughed, actually laughed. "Business transactions, completely legitimate business transactions that were properly categorized. You don't understand finance, Deborah. You never did. That's why you're letting Matsuda manipulate you. He's going to bleed you dry chasing shadows, and when this is over, you'll have nothing, less than nothing." "Is that a threat?" "It's a prediction." He stepped closer, and I instinctively stepped back, my hand on the door. "You're going to lose this case. And when you do, When the judge dismisses this frivolous lawsuit, you're going to owe us for our legal fees. That's how this works. Frivolous litigation has consequences. Ashley put her hand on Mark's arm, playing the role of peacemaker. That's not what we want, though. Deborah, we came here to offer you one more chance. Drop this lawsuit. We'll give you $100,000. Not 50, 100. You can get out of this apartment, get back on your feet, start over. Mark doesn't want to see you suffer. How generous, considering you're living in a $1.2 million house bought with money that should have been split between us. Mark's face reddened. That house was purchased with legitimate business profits from after our divorce. You have no claim to it. Then you'll have no problem proving that in court. You stubborn... Mark caught himself, but I saw it. The rage, the contempt, the real person underneath the mask. You're making a huge mistake. You think you're being strong? You're being stupid. You're going to end up broken and bankrupt, and for what? Pride? For justice. There is no justice, he shouted. There's only winners and losers, and you've always been a loser, Deborah. You were a loser when I married you. You were dead weight for 23 years, and you're a pathetic loser now. The only difference is that now everyone gets to see it. The words should have hurt. Maybe a year ago they would have destroyed me. But now, hearing the venom in his voice, seeing Ashley's shocked expression as she realized Mark had gone too far, I felt only cold satisfaction. Get out, I said quietly. Get away from my home and don't come back. All future communication goes through our attorneys. Mark stared at me, breathing hard. For a moment, I thought he might do something. Push past me, grab me. His hands were clenched into fists. Then Ashley tugged his arm. Mark, let's go. This isn't working. They turned and left. I watched them walk to their car, Mark's body language radiating fury. Ashley was talking to him urgently, trying to calm him down. He shook her off, got into the driver's seat, and slammed the door hard enough that I could hear it from my doorway. I closed my door and locked it, then leaned against it, my heart pounding. My hands were shaking again. The confrontation had been worse than the first time, more personal, more vicious. Mark's words echoed in my head. Pathetic loser, dead weight, always been a loser. Part of me wanted to crumble, to cry, to wonder if he was right. But another part of me, a stronger part, was analyzing what had just happened. They'd come here to break me, to make me feel small and scared and foolish. They'd thrown money at me, then insults, trying to find the thing that would make me give up. And I hadn't. I'd stood my ground. I'd told them no. I'd seen through their manipulation and sent them away angry and empty-handed. I walked to my kitchen, poured myself a glass of water with steady hands, and called Matsuda's emergency line. They came to my apartment, I told him, both of them. I'm going to tell you everything they said. You're going to want to hear this. Because Mark, in his anger, had made a mistake. He'd confirmed things. He'd shown his desperation. He'd revealed just how much he had to lose. And that meant I was closer to winning than I'd thought. The hearing took place on a Thursday morning in early June, over a year since I'd first seen those Instagram photos. The courtroom was smaller than I'd imagined from TV shows. Wood paneling, fluorescent lights, a middle-aged female judge named Patricia Caldwell who'd built a reputation on having no tolerance for financial games. I sat at the plaintiff's table with Matsuda and Patricia Wong. Across the aisle, Mark sat with Thomas Brennan and two associates, all in expensive suits. Ashley was in the gallery behind them, looking nervous in a conservatively tailored dress. Probably Brennan's idea, to make her look respectable rather than like the other woman. Judge Caldwell reviewed the filings, then looked up. This is a petition to set aside a divorce decree based on allegations of fraudulent concealment of assets. Mr. Matsuda, You have the burden of proof. Present your case." Matsuda stood. He'd warned me that he was methodical, not flashy, and that's exactly what he was. He walked Judge Caldwell through the evidence piece by piece. Bank statements showing transfers, corporate filings for Ashmark Holdings, property records for the house, tax returns that didn't match the financial disclosures Mark had submitted during our divorce. "Your Honor, the pattern is clear," Matsuda said. 6 months before the divorce filing, Mr. Harris began systematically transferring assets out of marital accounts and into corporate entities he controlled but never disclosed. The timing correlates precisely with divorce milestones. This wasn't business as usual. This was deliberate concealment. Brennan stood to object. "Your Honor, Mr. Harris runs a complex financial consultancy. Corporate restructuring is routine in his business. The plaintiff's attorney is trying to make normal business operations look sinister by cherry-picking transactions and ignoring context." "Then provide the context, Mr. Brennan," Judge Caldwell said. "I'm interested to hear Mr. Harris explain these transactions." Mark took the stand. He was confident at first, explaining his business in terms designed to sound sophisticated and over my head. Multiple corporate entities, investment strategies, client funds versus personal funds, asset protection protocols. He spoke about market volatility, business debts, the need to shelter certain assets from liability. But when Patricia Wong took over the cross-examination, the confidence started to crack. "Mr. Harris, you testified that these transfers were routine business operations. Can you explain why there were no similar transfers in the 3 years prior to your divorce filing?" "Market conditions were different. Business needs changed." "I see. And this property—" Patricia held up the deed. "The residence at 1847 Oakwood Drive, purchased for $1.2 million 3 months after your divorce was finalized. You testified in your divorce proceedings that your business had minimal liquidity and significant debts. Where did the money for this purchase come from?" "Business earnings from after the divorce. The business recovered." "Recovered in 3 months? Enough to purchase a $1.2 million property?" Patricia's tone was skeptical but professional. "Your business tax returns for that year show gross revenue of $480,000 and net profit of $127,000. Even if you'd spent nothing on living expenses, you couldn't have saved enough to buy that house." Mark's jaw tightened. "There were other income sources, investment gains." "From which investments? We've subpoenaed your records." "There are no investment gains of that magnitude in your personal accounts during that period." "Corporate investments? Through Ashmark Holdings?" "Yes." "The LLC you formed 2 months before filing for divorce. The entity you never mentioned during discovery." Brennan objected, but Judge Caldwell overruled him. "Answer the question, Mr. Harris." "I wasn't required to disclose every business entity I owned." Patricia smiled slightly. "Actually, Mr. Harris, Illinois law requires disclosure of all assets and entities in which you have a substantial interest. Did you or did you not have an obligation to disclose Ashmark Holdings during your divorce proceedings?" A long pause. "I may have overlooked it." "You overlooked a corporate entity you personally formed? An entity through which you moved over $2 million? An entity you used to purchase a house and multiple investment properties? I have a lot of business entities. I can't be expected to remember every—" "We've done a complete corporate search, Mr. Harris. You have exactly 4 business entities registered in your name. Ashmark Holdings is one of them. Are you testifying that you simply forgot it existed?" I watched Mark's face redden. The carefully maintained composure was dissolving. His attorney looked concerned. "I didn't forget. I didn't think it was relevant." "You didn't think an entity holding over $2 million in assets was relevant to your divorce proceedings?" Those assets were generated after the divorce filing. The bank statements show the initial capitalization occurred before the filing. $300,000 transferred from your marital business account to Ashmark Holdings account 6 months before you filed for divorce. That's marital property, isn't it? Mark didn't answer immediately. I could see him calculating, trying to find a way out. But Patricia had him cornered with his own records. Mr. Harris? It was a business decision. It was a decision to move marital assets into a hidden entity so they wouldn't be divided in your divorce. That's fraud, Mr. Harris. Brennan objected strenuously, but the damage was done. Judge Caldwell called for a recess, and when we reconvened, Mark looked shaken. Ashley was crying quietly in the gallery. Matsuda leaned toward me and whispered, "We've got him." But Patricia wasn't done. When testimony resumed, she presented more evidence. Email exchanges with his accountant discussing asset protection strategies dated 2 months before the divorce filing. An appraisal of the Oakwood Drive property Mark had commissioned while we were still married months before he claimed the business had recovered. The final blow came when Patricia presented Mark's social media posts. Photos of the house, the cars, the vacations, time-stamped and geotagged, showing exactly where he'd been and what he'd been spending. "Your Honor," Patricia said, "Mr. Harris claimed under oath during his divorce that his business was struggling, that he had minimal liquidity, that he could barely make ends meet. These photos tell a different story. They show a lifestyle incompatible with his sworn testimony." Judge Caldwell looked at Mark. "Mr. Harris, I've reviewed all the evidence presented today. Do you have anything else to add?" Mark looked at his attorney. Brennan whispered something urgent. Mark shook his head. "No, Your Honor." "Then I'm ready to make my ruling." Judge Caldwell's expression left no doubt about her opinion. She'd seen enough financial fraud in her years on the bench to recognize it clearly, and she didn't hide her contempt. "I've presided over many complex divorce cases," she began, looking directly at Mark. "I've seen assets hidden in offshore accounts, property concealed through third parties, businesses undervalued, but rarely have I seen such a systematic, premeditated scheme to defraud a spouse executed by someone whose profession is financial consulting, someone who should know better. Someone who absolutely did know better." Mark's face had gone pale. Brennan sat rigid beside him, knowing what was coming. "Mr. Harris, you didn't simply hide a few $1,000s. You orchestrated a comprehensive plan to strip your marriage of millions while presenting yourself to this court as a struggling businessman barely making ends meet. You formed corporate entities specifically to conceal assets. You timed transfers to avoid discovery deadlines. You provided false sworn testimony about your financial condition. And then, perhaps most remarkably, you and your new wife documented your deception on social media for the world to see. Ashley's quiet crying had stopped. She sat frozen, staring at the judge. The evidence presented by Mrs. Harris's counsel is overwhelming and, frankly, damning. Bank records don't lie. Corporate filings don't lie. Property deeds don't lie. Your own photographs don't lie. You do, Mr. Harris. You lied to your wife of 23 years. You lied to this court, and you wasted this court's time and resources with your continued denials. Judge Caldwell shuffled through papers on her bench. "I am hereby granting Mrs. Harris's petition to set aside the divorce decree on grounds of fraud. The original settlement is void. Furthermore, I'm ordering the following. First, a complete forensic accounting of all assets held by Mr. Harris directly or through any corporate entity, trust, or third-party arrangement. This accounting will be conducted by a court-appointed expert at Mr. Harris's expense." Brennan tried to object, but Judge Caldwell cut him off with a look. Second, I'm issuing an immediate freeze on all assets held by Mr. Harris and any entity he controls, including Ashmark Holdings, pending the resolution of the property division. This includes the residence at 1847 Oakwood Drive, all vehicles registered to these entities, and all bank and investment accounts. Mr. Harris, you are not to transfer, sell, or encumber any assets without court approval. Mark looked like he might be sick. Ashley had her hand over her mouth. Third, based on the preliminary evidence, I'm awarding Mrs. Harris temporary spousal support of $12,000 per month, retroactive to the date she filed this petition, while we await the complete accounting and final property division. Mr. Harris, you have 30 days to pay the arrears. I did the math in my head. Over a year of back support at $12,000 per month. That was nearly $150,000 immediately. Fourth, I'm sanctioning Mr. Harris personally for discovery violations during the original divorce proceedings. The sanction is $250,000, payable to Mrs. Harris within 60 days. Matsuda squeezed my hand under the table. I'd expected maybe $20,000 or $30,000 in sanctions. $250,000 was devastating. But Judge Caldwell wasn't finished. Fifth, I'm ordering Mr. Harris to pay Mrs. Harris's reasonable attorney fees and costs for this action. Mr. Matsuda, please submit your invoicing within 10 days. That meant Mark would be paying the $15,000 I'd borrowed from my brother, plus all of Matsuda's fees and costs over the past year. Probably another $200,000. Finally. Judge Caldwell's tone became even more severe. I am referring this matter to the Illinois Attorney Registration and Disciplinary Commission and to the state's attorney's office for investigation of potential criminal fraud. Mr. Harris, you are a financial professional who provides advice to clients about managing their assets. Your conduct in this case demonstrates either profound dishonesty or stunning incompetence. Either way, the public should be made aware. Mark stood up suddenly. Your Honor, please. Sit down, Mr. Harris. Judge Caldwell's voice was ice. You had your chance to tell the truth. You chose deception. Now you face the consequences. I don't know if you'll lose your professional licenses or face criminal charges. That's for others to determine. But you will make Mrs. Harris whole for what you stole from her, and you will do it quickly. She banged her gavel. We'll reconvene in 60 days for a status conference on the forensic accounting. Court is adjourned. The room erupted. Brennan was immediately talking urgently with Mark, who looked shell-shocked. Ashley was crying again, harder now, and several people in the gallery were whispering excitedly. I sat perfectly still, processing what had just happened. I'd won, not partially, not with compromise. I'd won completely. Matsuda turned to me, grinning. That was better than I'd hoped. Caldwell destroyed him. Patricia Wong was packing up documents, also smiling. The criminal referral is significant. Even if he's not prosecuted, the investigation alone will ruin his professional reputation. No one will trust a financial consultant who committed financial fraud in his own divorce. I watched Mark and Ashley leave the courtroom. He was walking stiffly, refusing to look at anyone. She was clinging to his arm, mascara running down her face, looking nothing like the polished woman in the Instagram photos. They'd have to leave the house. The court had frozen it. They'd have to sell the luxury cars. Their lavish lifestyle was over, and everyone would know why. Because Mark hadn't just lost in court. Judge Caldwell had publicly labeled him a liar and a fraud, and that label would follow him forever. Outside the courthouse, reporters were waiting. Matsuda had tipped them off, knowing this would be a significant case. I gave a brief statement. I'm grateful that the truth has finally come out. No one should have to face what I faced. A spouse who steals their marital assets and lies under oath. I hope this case sends a message that such behavior has serious consequences. My phone buzzed. Text messages from Sarah and Michael. "Mom, we saw the news. We're so sorry. We should have believed you sooner. We love you." I smiled. Even my children now knew the truth. Mark's career was over. His reputation was destroyed. His assets were frozen. He faced massive financial penalties and possible criminal charges. And I was finally completely vindicated. The forensic accounting took 3 months. The court-appointed expert, a stern CPA named Harold Weinberg, uncovered even more than Patricia Wong had found. By the time his report was submitted, the documented hidden assets totaled $3.7 million. Judge Caldwell ordered Mark to pay me $1.85 million as my share, plus the $250,000 in sanctions, plus my attorney fees, which totaled $186,000, plus the retroactive spousal support of nearly $150,000. In total, Mark owed me approximately $2.4 million. He didn't have it in liquid assets anymore. To pay me, he had to sell the Oakwood Drive house, the dream home he'd bought for Ashley. It sold for $1.1 million, less than he'd paid for it because the market had shifted and because the notoriety of the case had made it stigmatized property. The luxury cars were sold. Investment accounts were liquidated. The corporate entities were dismantled. By December, I received the first major payment, $1.5 million transferred into my new bank account. The rest would come in installments as additional assets were liquidated. I paid back my brother James immediately, with interest he didn't want but I insisted on. I paid Margaret, Lisa, and Joan for the countless dinners they'd bought me over the past year. Then I went house hunting. The condo I bought was modest compared to Mark's former house, just 1,800 square feet, but it was in a beautiful neighborhood with mature trees, and it was mine. No apartment walls, no loud neighbors, space for Sarah and Michael to visit, with a guest room that had a view of a small garden. I furnished it slowly, carefully, choosing pieces I actually liked rather than what Mark would have approved of. I hung artwork I'd always loved but never bought because Mark said it was too frivolous. I planted flowers I wanted, not the formal landscaping he'd insisted on. At 59 years old, I'd started over, but this time I was starting from a position of strength. The library promoted me to a full-time position with benefits when they heard my situation had improved. I didn't need the money anymore, but I loved the work. Loved helping patrons find books, loved the quiet satisfaction of organizing knowledge. So I stayed. Sarah and Michael came to visit for Christmas, and we had the first honest conversation we'd had in years. They apologized for not believing me sooner, for accepting their father's narrative without question. I told them I understood. He was their father, and he'd always been good at presenting himself as trustworthy. "He's not talking to us anymore," Michael said sadly. "We tried to reach out, but he says we betrayed him by taking your side." "I'm sorry," I said, and I meant it. I'd never wanted to damage their relationship with their father. I'd only wanted what was fair. "Don't be," Sarah said firmly. "We're not sorry. We needed to know who he really is." Meanwhile, Mark's life had imploded in every possible way. The investigation by the state's attorney didn't result in criminal charges. The statute of limitations and prosecutorial discretion worked in his favor. But the Illinois Attorney Registration and Disciplinary Commission suspended his certified financial planner credentials pending a full ethics investigation. Without those credentials, he couldn't practice as a financial consultant. His firm dissolved. His business partners, discovering the extent of what he'd done, severed all ties and sued him for damaging the firm's reputation. Those lawsuits were still pending, but they'd cost him even more money he didn't have. The story had been covered extensively in Chicago's business press. "Local financial advisor caught hiding assets in divorce," read one headline. "Financial fraud case results in $2.4 million judgment," read another. Anyone Googling Mark's name found those articles first. He was unemployable in his field. I heard through mutual acquaintances that he was working in sales at a car dealership. The same man who'd lectured me about finances, who'd condescended to me for 23 years, was now making commission on used Hondas. Ashley had left him in October, right after the house sold. She'd filed for divorce herself, citing irreconcilable differences. But really, she'd just seen the writing on the wall. She'd signed up for a wealthy husband and a luxury lifestyle. Instead, she got a disgraced man with massive debts and no career prospects. The Instagram account that had once shown off her blessed life had been deleted entirely. I heard she'd moved back to her hometown in Indiana, working as a receptionist at a medical office. No more designer bags, no more tropical vacations, no more pretending to be something she wasn't. I didn't celebrate their misery exactly, but I didn't feel sorry for them either. They'd made their choices. They'd stolen from me, lied about me, tried to destroy me. And when that failed, they'd face the natural consequences of their actions. Sometimes in the evenings, I'd sit on my small patio with a glass of wine and think about the past 2 years. The fear, the determination, the moment when I decided to fight back instead of accepting what had been done to me. Margaret came over one Saturday for brunch on that same patio. "You look happy," she observed. "I am happy," I said, surprising myself with how true it was. For the first time in years, maybe decades, I'm actually happy. "You deserve it. You fought for it." "I did." I raised my glass. "To fighting back." "To fighting back," she echoed, and we drank to that. My new life wasn't perfect. I was still adjusting to being single, still learning who I was outside of being Mark's wife. But I was free. I was financially secure. I was respected. And I'd proven to myself that I was stronger and smarter than anyone, including me, had given me credit for. Mark had spent 23 years making me believe I needed him, that I couldn't survive without him, that I wasn't smart enough to understand the things he understood. He'd been wrong about all of it, and now everyone knew it. So what would you have done? Would you have taken that first settlement and walked away? Would you have cashed that check for $50,000 and let it go? Would you have believed him when he said you weren't smart enough to win? I almost did. I almost gave up 100 times, but I'm glad I didn't. If you enjoyed this story, please leave a comment below telling me what you would have done in my situation. Subscribe to hear more stories about people who refuse to be victims. And remember, you're stronger than you think. Sometimes you just need to prove it to yourself. Thank you for listening to my story.